It's rather unusual for forest monks to give talks with titles. So I usually, if I find myself in this situation, try and follow the middle way, which means not keeping too strictly to the title, but not deviating from it altogether. So I hope at least I can share some thoughts and reflections on the Dhamma from my own study and practice over the years that will be of some benefit to you. I think one of the problems, let's say, of Buddhism is that it is so intellectually satisfying that often those people who are drawn to Buddhism may find themselves being content with merely that level of interest. But if that is the case, then one will never really understand the teachings of the Buddha and never really penetrate their true meaning. I feel the way that Buddhism becomes real for us is when we start off with our own human condition, our own human life. How are we spending our life? How do we what principles do we base our life on? What are our values? There is a very short, succinct teaching given by the Buddha, which the Buddha says, what is a sage? He says a sage is one who does not harm himself or others. This is very, very short and rather simple saying, but it has profound implications. What the Buddha is saying is that wisdom may be gauged by how you live your life. The word that the Buddha used most commonly to refer to his teaching was not Buddhism, but the term Dhamma Vinaya. And the word Dhamma, or its Sanskrit version Dhamma, is well known to most of you, I'm sure. And one talks about practicing the Dhamma. But the original formulation was Dhamma Vinaya. We practice the Dhamma Vinaya. So what does that mean? Now some of you may have heard the term Vinaya referring to the monk's discipline, but in fact it has a much wider application than that. And the idea is that the practice of Buddhism is one which must be carried on, both internally and externally. There is no evidence at all in the Buddha's teachings that he suggested, that he recommended a turning away from society or a closing one's eyes to injustices in the society at all. In fact, one of the leading lay supporters of the Buddha, Anathapindika, would go to the monastery every morning, offer food to the monks, and then returning to his house, he would offer alms to all the poor people in the city in which he lived. And this was considered to be the actions of a model Buddhist. So the teaching is one of development of one's relationship to the external world, both the physical, natural world and the social world, as a complement to and an inseparable part of inner development. So the word Vinaya refers to the efforts to create the most conducive conditions for the practice and realization of Dhamma. It means giving thought to the way in which we live in our society. How can we live in such a way as to encourage goodness, to discourage cruelty and injustice? What is the most intelligent way to do that? And although Buddhism is sometimes represented as rather pessimistic religion, in fact, I would suggest it's quite the opposite, in that there is a deep faith in the ability of human beings to recognize the good and to find ways to realize that goodness. So morality in Buddhism is not considered as a list of commandments from God or from Buddha, but the precepts are considered the most intelligent way of ordering human affairs so as to create the conditions conducive to practice and realization of Dhamma. Wisdom has to be and must always be expressed in the quality of one's actions and speech. If one truly understands the Buddha's teaching, understands the law of karma, then morality becomes the natural, unforced expression of one's being in the world. This is one of the fundamental principles of Theravada Buddhism, and one which is very stressed by my teacher. The Buddha himself is described in a number of ways, described himself in a number of ways. One of those, the terms used to describe the Buddha, and one that is chanted on a daily basis by Buddhists, is the term Vicca Charana Sampanno. Vicca means the internal wisdom, internal knowledge. Charana means conduct. Sampanno means one who's perfected. He's perfect in vision and conduct. So again, you see that those two things are expressed in the Buddha himself as being inseparable. Vision is expressed in conduct. If vision is not expressed in conduct, it's faulty. It's not to be trusted. Now, on the level of training level, precepts are, to begin with, a matter of using this wonderful ability that we have to refrain, which is a much misunderstood, much maligned gift that we possess. I think it's fair to say that animals lack this ability. No matter how patient you might be and diligent you might be, I would think it would be impossible to train a cat to feel compassion for mice, or to refrain from jumping on a mouse and eating it or killing it. But human beings can do that. We can have the impulse to harm, to maim, to kill arise very strongly in the mind, but that we do also have the ability to recognize that as unwise, inconsistent with our ideals, and to refrain. So the ability not to do certain things is an extremely creative ability, essence of creativity, knowing when not to do. You can see this in art. In Chinese painting is so powerful because of all the empty spaces that are left. Non-air-conditioned rooms are made livable by windows which allow air to come in and out. Writing, composition is made most powerful by knowing what to leave out. And similarly in social intercourse, in the way that we live together as human beings, the ability to refrain from certain actions wisely and voluntarily, not through a sense of fear or compulsion, but because we sees the value of doing so. This is one of the things I would suggest that make us truly human, and this is a very noble thing, to exercise that ability. So virtue and wisdom are considered to be inseparable, and the simile that the Buddha gave to explain this or express this was that of someone washing their hands. Just as the left hand washes the right hand, the right hand washes the left hand. Similarly, virtue cleanses wisdom, and wisdom cleanses virtue. So the precepts are to be examined one by one, and although in the traditional exposition of the teachings, precepts are considered to precede wisdom. Wisdom is needed right from the start, the initial level, in order to see the drawbacks and the suffering inherent in not keeping precepts and the value of keeping precepts. And when one has thoroughly investigated a precept until one sees very clearly the drawbacks of not keeping it and the value of keeping it, then one will be establishing a firm commitment to that precept. Now, the subject of this talk being one of integrating Dhamma into everyday life, I don't see any difference. I don't see this as a matter of integrating one thing into another thing, because this is, where do you practice Dhamma except in your everyday life? I think the confusion that may come about is when Dhamma practice is considered to be a matter of sitting in a particular way with your eyes closed, eyes crossed if you want, and concentrating on an object or walking up and down in a particular way, and considering that's what Dhamma practice is, and then you think, well, this is so far apart from the challenges in my everyday life. How am I ever going to integrate the two things? Whereas my understanding is that sitting with your legs crossed and your eyes closed is an integral part, the heart of practice, if you like. But it is just one part of it, and there are a whole variety of skillful means that the Buddha gave to us, and the skill is to know in any particular circumstance which Dhamma teaching should be applied. And the good news is that there is no situation in which you can find yourself in which you cannot find a Dhamma practice to apply. Even on the basic level of patience. Patience is not one of the more exotic and interesting Dhamma teachings. Buddhist monks are very rarely asked to give Dhamma talks on patience in everyday life. But when I first arrived in Ajahn Chah's monastery, and I didn't speak a word of Thai at that point, I kept on hearing this. He'd give these really long talks for about 3 hours, sometimes longer. And although I'd been used to sitting cross-legged, the monastic etiquette requires you to sit in the papiya position. I don't know if you've seen Thai people sit with one leg to one side. So the first feeling, you feel awkward. It's not symmetrical, it's not balanced, and it feels awkward. And you have to sit in that position. You can switch from one side to the other side. You tend to do so at shorter and shorter intervals, but you have to sit like that. You can't sit cross-legged. And so you're hearing, and it's hot, you sit, and there's no cushions and no zafus, and and there are mosquitoes, and you're listening to something you don't understand. 3 hours, and I started to pick up this word. It seemed to recur again and again and again and again. It was otton. So when I, after hearing one of these talks, I asked one of the Western monks who could speak English, what does otton mean? And he said, patient endurance. So I quickly grasped this as one of the most essential things that Ajahn was teaching. And I think in daily life there are, although Western technology and tends to seem to me at least to be devoting itself to find ways in which you can live without having to be patient. And let's say computers, if you have to wait for more than 2 seconds for a website to come up, you're so irritated already, and sort of expect things to be there immediately, and start to, if you not careful, you start to think you have a right not to experience pain or discomfort. And at the very least, the idea of developing patience or patient endurance, being willing to abide peacefully, to be friends with things that you find difficult and unpleasant. I don't think that's a dominant spiritual ideal, even amongst Buddhists. But the Buddha said patient endurance or patience is the supreme incinerator of defilements. Yeah. So the Buddha gave it number one status, in terms of that spiritual power which is really effective in dealing with all that makes the mind agitated, clouded, and miserable. So right away you can see, even if you're in a position or in a situation where you can't close your eyes and be mindful of your breathing, you can always be patient. And if you're exercising patience, you are practicing the spiritual quality that the Buddha considered to be most efficacious in the realization of Nibbana. Wonderful, isn't it? I mean, you can always be practicing something or other. But coming back to Sila for a minute, I was talking about the importance of taking up each precept and investigating it and seeing the rationale for it, the value of it, until you get this sense of faith and confidence in it as a training. So we have this idea of education or training in Buddhism. And if any of you have ever participated in a Buddhist ceremony in which you ask for the precepts, you may have noticed that the wording of these precepts is significant, as is the fact that the precept ceremony begins with the lay community requesting the precepts from the monk. So that already tells you that the impetus has to come from the lay Buddhist. It's not the monk saying, now I'm going to give you the precepts, listen after me. The lay person says, please, Venerable Sir, will you give me the precepts? So it has to be voluntary. And the monk gives the precepts, which are recited by the lay person, and they say, I undertake the training to refrain from taking life. So it's a training that you take upon yourself. You're taking on a particular way of training intention. You're taking on the training of using the intention to refrain from harming as a way of removing, opposing, and ultimately removing the intention to harm. Now, it's often said, just be mindful. But what does that really mean? And can you just be mindful? Actually, I would argue that you always have to be mindful of something. Mindfulness needs a peg. On the level of satipatthana meditation, we talk about the body, feelings, the mind, mental objects, and so on. But in daily life, one of the most important pegs for mindfulness is precepts. So this is a very different way of talking about morality, isn't it? It's not keeping commandments out of a sense of fear of punishment, desire for reward, but this is a training of intention and a skillful means of using the intention to refrain from certain actions and speech as a peg or an object of mindfulness. And let me give you an example of how that might work. Let's say a mosquito was to bite you, or let's say a malarial mosquito was to bite you. Yes. And now most people, and I'm going to shock you here, even many Thai Buddhists, will just go like that without thinking. But the essence of Buddhism is what does the word Buddha mean? It means the awakened one. So we're trying, if we want to talk about integrating Buddhism into daily life, it means integrating the sense of awakenedness or wakefulness into one's life through mindfulness. And here, using that precept, if we take that precept seriously, think about it a lot, reflect on it a lot, it's like it's right there in the forefront of our mind. And anything that's there in the forefront of your mind is likely to pop up easily. If it's something that you may have thought about once or accepted intellectually on a certain occasion and then forgot about, then it's unlikely that it's going to, the recollection of it is going to arise very easily. But it's that recollection of a precept that arises at that moment, which causes a very interesting thing to happen. You're about, just as the cat instinctually jumps on the mouse, you're just about instinctually going to destroy the life of something that you feel threatening or which is biting you. And you stop. And Billy, you stop. You stop. How do you stop? Why do you stop? You stop because there is the recollection of the precept not to kill. And at that moment there is a certain tension in the mind. But that tension lasts probably just a short moment, and then you realize what you're doing and think, what shall I do now? What's the best thing to do now? And maybe just blow it away or brush it away, and you solve the problem in that way. Mindfulness is thus the precondition for wise reflection. It's as if you drive a wedge in between intention and action, or intention and speech. Mindfulness of a precept is the tool by which you create that wedge and create that breathing space and that opportunity for wise reflection. In Thailand, there's a great teacher who passed away some years ago. Some of you may have heard of him, Ajahn Buddhadasa. And one of the sayings that he was renowned for was that the meaning of mindfulness is, I'll use the Thai first, it's very short, sharp, is panya tan, which means that the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding that you have on an intellectual level, the ability for that to arise at a time when it's most needed when you're under pressure, when there is a temptation to act in an unskillful way, that's mindfulness. It means that wisdom is abreast of the circumstances. It's not that you do something wrong, immediately you've done it, you think, oh no, there I go again. I said I wouldn't do that, and I've gone and done it again. Poor old mosquito. May you be reborn in a very pleasant heavenly realm, and just sort of try to make the best of a bad job. But so, I mean, the real challenge is, okay, you know the teachings, and you've got a basic idea of what it's all about, but how can you draw upon that wisdom when it's needed? Not after the case, but right at the moment that it's needed. And that's the role of mindfulness. And mindfulness needs an object. It needs a peg. And if you're much more kind of go with the flow, free and easy, just be mindful, those ideals don't tend to be sharp enough and adaptive enough to unexpected circumstances, in the way that a clear-cut principle which has been laid down, which you've adopted wisely and consciously, but which takes into no account at all your penchant or your skill for rationalization and all the other things that you may take to be extenuating circumstances. So it cuts through an awful lot. Now, at that moment that I mentioned just a moment ago, there is the mindfulness of the precept, giving the opportunity to reflect on what am I doing, what should I do, in line to be consistent with the principles I've adopted, the ideals that I exhort in my life. That moment, you see that intention to harm for what it is, an automatic conditioned response or reaction to a stimulus, be it a stimulus being pain, irritation, itch or whatever. And so at that moment you're patient, you're mindful, and once you're mindful you also have to be patient, because you might be mindful and then still anyway, you can't help it, you're just going to do it anyway because you lack the patience. But if let's say you have the mindfulness, you have the patience, you have the sense of shame and wise, intelligent fear of consequences, then the volition to harm is revealed as an impermanent, unsatisfactory and selfless phenomenon. So right from the very beginning of training, training of keeping precepts in daily life, you have opportunity to develop insight into the most profound teachings of the Buddha of anicca, dukkha, anatta, or impermanence, unsatisfactoriness and not self. Now I'm really trying to emphasize this to see that there's not this huge kind of gap between the way you're living your life in the society and the higher levels of experience on retreat. It's a continuum, and there are certain basic principles which carry through and have to carry through. Now, Sila has the added advantage of creating a sense of safety and harmony in a group. We have this ability as a group or a community to adopt certain principles of behavior. Let's say we decide while listening to a Dhamma talk we're not going to sit and chat amongst ourselves or bother other people, and everyone sees the value of it and adheres to it. And this is an expression of our maturity as human beings, that we can do something like this. Now, the value of precepts that I just mentioned internally is, on one level, this first level of training and understanding of intention and use of wise intention and so on. The external complement to that is that we're creating situations, we're creating communities in which there is a sense of trust, friendship and safety. Now, why the Buddha taught the Dhamma Vinaya, why he stressed that the internal and the external aspects have to go together, is because if you, no matter how inspired with the teachings you are and determined to practice them, if you're in a situation in which you don't feel safe, or you feel your loved ones are not safe, or you feel you can't trust anybody, you won't have the psychological foundation for any refined internal work. So we have to find ways of creating those kinds of conditions. And when a group adopts certain shared codes and standards of behavior, then we have a real opportunity that can happen. Now, in Buddhism, we make a distinction between volition, as I said, and action, and understand that we can use intelligent volition to prevent the action upon unwholesome, unskillful volition. So we can, through that, experience liberation on one level. That's the liberation from creating the sort of karma which will result in this lifetime. It might result in imprisonment, or very least loss of reputation, and after this life may lead to rebirth in lower realms. So there is a liberation from the danger of unfortunate rebirth through the wise keeping of precepts. So there is a liberation through that. What is important psychologically also is that I'll give you a simile that teachers have used in the past, and that is someone who considers themselves, truly or falsely, never mind, to be physically attractive, and as a result loves to look in the mirror, and can look in the mirror for a long time and not be bored by it, even walking in the city and seeing reflections from plate glass windows and being drawn to look at one, so being extremely pleased with one's physical reflection. And someone who considers themselves ugly and identifies with that very much, and wishes there were no mirrors anywhere in the world, and doesn't want to look in the mirror at all. And the idea being that one whose virtue is beautiful, one who keeps precepts well, likes to be with oneself. Self-respect, self-esteem, ability to be a friend to oneself, a good friend to oneself, comes through the intention, consistent intention to keep precepts. And one who doesn't keep precepts, who hurts, harms, takes advantage of others either physically or verbally, even although they may be successful in their career and generally get on well, make a lot of money, the drawback of it is that deep down they won't like themselves very much, and they will not like to spend time with themselves. They will always be looking for some kind of distraction. Now the worst thing about being wealthy is that you have much more opportunity to distract yourself from someone who's poor. And and particularly in this society, we have an unrivaled opportunity for distraction. We have a huge number of weapons of mass distraction everywhere around us. And so if you're living your life in a very busy, confused way, you may not even notice that. But if anyone does become interested in spiritual practice and takes up meditation, they'll find a great deal of difficulty and a great deal of resistance because they don't want to get closer to what's really going on inside. So this is another way in which there is this there is already this complete integration of Dhamma practice. It's not something you have to sort of do. I mean, if it's true Dhamma practice, it's already integrated with precepts kept well, and purity of precepts. What does that mean? Does it mean you have to be pure? What does it mean to be pure? The Buddha didn't say purity of precepts means that you don't ever break a precept, because that would mean that you'd have to be mindful all the time, and only arahants are that. But what it means is that you have that firm intention to be mindful and train yourself to be mindful and to keep the precepts. But if you should break a precept, you acknowledge that and you reveal it to a good friend. You don't conceal it. You don't try to evade responsibility for it. And you have the firm intention not to commit that same fault again. So if you break a precept and you have that sense of acknowledgement to yourself, and a sense of non-concealment from others, and the sincere intention not to do that again, that precept is purified through that. So we purify our precepts through that. If you keep all 5 precepts, then you're good friends with yourself, you have a sense of self-respect, you like spending time with yourself, you're interested to explore your inner world, and there is a sense of well-being that arises in mind. And a sense of well-being and inner happiness is absolutely essential to progress in Dhamma Vinaya practice. Only the happy mind can understand suffering. A suffering mind cannot understand suffering as suffering. This is why spiritual life has to be enjoyable. If you don't enjoy your spiritual life as a Buddhist, you're not going to get very far with it. So that's not to say, enjoy every moment, your knee hurts, your back aches, you're enjoying it. But the big picture, understanding the significance, the context of particular periods and bouts of pain and discomfort, generally there's a sense of enjoyment and faith that this means something. This works, and not just faith in the teachings, but faith in yourself. We've had some interesting discussion about faith today, and you say, can we encapsulate Buddhist faith? Can you do without faith altogether? What does it mean? As Theravada Buddhists, faith is usually considered in terms of like working hypothesis, but there are certain things that we take on faith that we can't prove. One is the enlightenment of the Buddha. Now, what's significant about the enlightenment of the Buddha for a Theravada Buddhist is the insistence that the Buddha was a human being. He may have been a uniquely endowed human being, but he was a human being. And his enlightenment 2,500 years ago was the enlightenment of a very gifted human being. Through his enlightenment, the Buddha proved that human beings can become enlightened. So, if you read a Buddhist text and say, faith is in the Buddha's enlightenment, what does that mean to us in our daily life? It means faith in the human capacity for enlightenment. Now, as I understand that everyone here listening today is a human being, that means that also we have faith that every one of us, including yourself, has the capacity to realize enlightenment. That is the fundamental faith of a Buddhist. In Theravada tradition, now if you have a fundamental faith that you yourself have the capacity for enlightenment, that the eradication of unwholesome dhammas, the development of wholesome dhammas, the purification of the mind is possible. If you truly believe that, but you don't devote yourself to it, how can one avoid the accusation of hypocrisy? How can there be any sincerity? If you really believe that enlightenment is the highest attainment, the highest thing that a human being could realize, and you have it within yourself to realize that, in my view, that inevitably must lead onto the effort to abandon what should be abandoned, develop what should be developed, and purify the mind. So Buddhism always has to be a religion of practice, and a religion which is moment by moment, step by step, testing, putting to the test the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha's challenging us. He says, life's like this, is it? Is your life like this? Now what happens is that after a while you begin to feel as if you are on a long journey, on a journey through a strange land. But you've been given this most marvellous map. And as you walk along, you look at your map, and it says, on the left-hand side, there's a forest like this. Yes, there's the forest. And you walk a bit along, it says, just over there, there's a ridge, and there's a village on the ridge. It has about 50 houses, and there's a well. Oh, yes. And say, yes. Oh, this is a really good map. And then you sit down, and then you open up your map, and you look up ahead. Now, you've come from a country which is dead flat. And on this map, it says up ahead, there are mountains 10,000 feet high. And everything, and you say, how can that be? That's totally counterintuitive. I mean, you've never even seen a hill, more than about 100 feet high. And here it says, there are mountains 10,000 feet high. Now, what would your response be? My response is, there's just one map. It doesn't seem to me likely that the map in the parts that I've walked and covered should be so completely, incredibly accurate, and yet the other part of the map should be completely inaccurate, simply because the landforms it depicts are unknown to me. I find this a very useful way to reflect on things like rebirth, heaven realms, hell realms, and all those parts of Buddhism that you think, well, I just like to do the meditation. So, did I sense some resonance there? But like picking and choosing a teaching given by the Buddha is somewhat arrogant, I would say, and how far can you trust your own mind and your own judgment of what works and what doesn't work. There's a very famous teaching in which the Buddha took up a handful of leaves. You've probably heard this. And he says, "Monks, which is more? Number of leaves in my hand, number of leaves in the forest." And the monks will say, "Number of leaves in the forest, far more." And the Buddha says, "The number of leaves in the forest are comparable to all the things that I've realized and understood. Number of leaves in my hand, those things that I've realized and understood, which I think are useful for you to study and conducive to the realization of what I've realized. You don't need the whole thing." Okay. So what is the handful of leaves? The handful of leaves are the discourses of the Buddha. The discourses of the Buddha contain innumerable references to rebirth and to other realms of existence. So if you would like to sort of just forget about that bit, please remember that all those teachings on rebirth are part of the handful of leaves in the Buddha's hand. They're not the leaves on the forest floor. If they're leaves on the forest floor, the Buddha wouldn't ever have referred to other realms of being. So this is not to say you should. This is not a you shouldn't kind of teaching, but it's look at the teachings and look at your life and keep on doing the best you can to compare the teachings to your life. And that sense of faith in the mountains ahead will become stronger by itself. You need that kind of open mind, and teachings of rebirth are not irrelevant to how you live your life. Sometimes Western Buddhists can be rather dismissive of Asian Buddhists, and all they're doing is just making merit for the next life. Why is that? Why is there a dismissiveness in that comment? It's because since it's kind of superstitious, and in fact the assumption is that it's pointless. But if you were to accept that there is a future life, and how you live this present life is going to have some bearing on experiences, and it's actually quite intelligent. I spoke to people and said, "Are you saving for after your retirement?" And people say, "Yes, of course I am." I say, "Are you absolutely sure you're going to live that long?" Well, I mean, there's no way I could be sure, but yeah, it seems an intelligent thing to do, doesn't it? To save up for a post retirement life, which you may or may not enjoy. So why is that any difference from saving up from a post-life experience, which you definitely will enjoy, I hope, as opposed to suffer through? So these teachings, the teachings on right view, and the kinds of ways of looking at experience, the frames for experience, and being willing to adopt Buddhist frames for experience as laid down by the Buddha to interpret experience in terms of those frames, is a maturing factor, which again is not separate from meditation, and is in fact one of the most important conditions enabling that practice to really bear fruit as Buddhist practice and Buddhist enlightenment. So with that foundation of precepts and that willingness and interest and enjoyment of being present, and we develop the inner world of virtue. And it's not just mindfulness, but it's developing patience, kindness, compassion, effort. And in daily life, I think this word effort is again a very useful one to bear in mind. When Buddha said right effort, what does that mean? It means the effort to intelligently care for the mind, protect the mind from all that undermines it and all that sullies and defiles it. Given that you're not always going to be successful at that, the second kind of effort which is needed is the effort to use skillful means to remove, to alleviate the defilements, the afflictions that have already arisen. The third kind of right effort is to bring into being in your heart and mind those wholesome dhammas which have not yet arisen. And the fourth, to care for those that have already arisen and to nurture them intelligently so that they grow and grow and grow until they reach perfection. So again, whether you're in a monastery, you're in a very peaceful environment, you're in a very confused and difficult environment, these four efforts are always able. We can always practice those. So there's always an opportunity and indeed a necessity to practice those kinds of effort. And so I mentioned earlier the whole variety of practices that we need to develop. Traditionally, the Buddha talked about having a calming practice, a development of a mindfulness practice, such as mindfulness of breathing, in order to be able to return to a point of calm, in order to ground oneself calmly and clearly in the midst of people and situations which are not calm and clear. An ability to reflect on the unpleasant and unattractive aspects of the physical body, in the case when the mind becomes totally obsessed with sensual desire or inappropriate sexual desire. Ability to develop practice of metta, loving kindness, forgiveness, when the mind becomes obsessed with feelings of anger and resentment, and reflection on death, when the mind becomes very sluggish and lazy, and I will meditate when I've done this, and this is worked out, and then I'm going to go on retreat. Then I'm going to, we're always about to meditate. But being about to meditate isn't really what it's all about. Then you don't really benefit from anything in that way. And the reflection on death has many salutary effects if it's performed correctly. For one, it gives a real new perspective on family life. For instance, you realise that one day we're going to have to be separated from everyone we love, and we don't know when it's going to occur. It could occur any time at all. If you take that on board and really think about that and reflect on it, that kind of strong, unwholesome attachment tends to weaken. But more importantly, you begin to see it's not really worth it. Being angry and resentful at your husband or your wife or your mum or your dad or your kid, it's just such a small thing. If you live forever, or you live for eons like devatas, and you've got enough time to work that out, then maybe okay. But as human beings, do you have enough time? You don't. Life is fragile. Life is unsure, unpredictable. So the time we have together is fragile, unpredictable, unsure. And that being the case, and we really bear that in mind, I think it brings a new quality to our life together, in families and in the workplace. So we just don't have the time for all that stuff. And life's too short. So there are all kinds of discursive meditations that need to complement one's basic meditation practice. And I have a certain amount of experience teaching people who are terminally ill in Thailand. And generally speaking, when someone reaches the end of their life, if they have family members who are keen Buddhists, then those family members will encourage them to meditate, and usually to meditate on the word Buddha in its form Buddho. But it's very difficult for people who've never meditated before, of course, especially when they're experiencing physical pain. Now, the technique that I've taught and found very successful is to encourage the family member, let's say the daughter, son, to sit down with the person and encourage them to recollect the 10 things that they feel most proud of in their life. The things that when they think of them, they think, really, that was a good thing. I'm really glad I did that. And their mind brightens the moment that they think of that. It might be something to do with offerings to monasteries and religious organizations or charitable organizations, acts of self-sacrifice, something which was really, unquestionably good, that they feel proud of. Then get the family member to write those 10 points down, and then to sit with them and then go through them point by point. Say you have 10 points, 3 minutes on each point for the person to talk and chat and encourage them to remember that occasion. Now, if you do that, at the end of 30 minutes, that person's mind will be very bright. And then if you want to teach them to meditate on an object, like the breath or something like that, then wonderful. Or simply if you find that of those 10 points there might be one particular point which is particularly powerful and brings up particularly strong positive emotion in that person, then you can just take that one memory, that one recollection as a meditation object for that person, in order to give rise to that sense of well-being, which then can mature into rapture, piti, and to this deep relaxation of body and mind and concentration. So this is an example of using discursive thought as a means of training and disciplining and maturing the mind, leading the mind onwards to peace. So there are so many different ways and means of doing this, and everyone can experiment in this way. This particular meditation is called Jakanusati, and it's one of the traditional 40 meditation objects. Now, within those objects, there's quite a lot of room for creativity and to find something that works for you. It's not like, I'm doing this, it makes me very peaceful, but is it right? You have to know for yourself. Are you mindful? Are you clear? Are you awake? Are you enjoying it? And if you are, then probably it's right. The practice of meditation itself is that you have to enjoy it. One way I teach mindfulness of breathing in Thailand is just to say, enjoy your in-breath, enjoy your out-breath, enjoy your in-breath, enjoy your out. What does that mean? Just to enjoy the sensation. Because the psychological principle involved is that the reason that your mind is always going off here and there is because you enjoy it more than you enjoy being with your breath. So if you enjoy being with your breath, why bother thinking about this and thinking about that? I mean, just there's no incentive, You're doing something that's much more exciting and interesting. Now, when you're practicing mindfulness to begin with, your mind will wander. Now, what happens is your mind wanders, and you realize that your mind has wandered, and mindfulness arises, and you bring your mind back. Now, that movement is often one which is a cause of some discouragement, even despair amongst meditators. But from my point of view, this is a perfection in action. It's called the perfection of renunciation. Because what's happening is the mind has got caught up in a worthless mental state and realized that, and has consciously and voluntarily released the attachment to that thought, that memory, that fantasy, and has come back to the present moment and the meditation object. This is a movement which is highly skillful and virtuous and karmically significant. It is the movement of renunciation. So if you've been sitting for 20 minutes, not peaceful at all, just my mind's going there, and bring it back, and there it's gone again, and bring it back. So really practiced a lot of renunciation, and my mind went there, and I renounced that, and I came back, and then it went there, and I renounced that. I renounced a lot of things in this meditation practice. So that's one way of looking at meditation. And remember that how you talk to yourself about your meditation, how you articulate it to yourself, is part of it. It's not separate, and it's something that you need to give attention to. Skillful framing and skillful conceptualization of what you're doing and how you talk to yourself about what you're doing. The second point I'd like to make here is that every time the mind wanders and you bring it back, you are strengthening the mindfulness muscle. Okay. You're developing that ability to recognize that something's irrelevant, unwholesome, put it down, come back, smooth renunciation, but that it's using this mindfulness muscle. Now, the more you use that mindfulness muscle, the stronger the mindfulness muscle becomes. Then notice, observe in your daily life. When you get caught up in something, you start to notice that you become aware of it much more quickly than you used to do. And you find your ability to withdraw from it, to re-establish your sense of groundedness and awareness in the present is much enhanced. So don't just take the experience in the meditation period as your measure or your gauge. I'm not getting anywhere in meditation, I'm hopeless. Look into your daily life and the changes that take place over weeks, over months. Find generally not getting so caught up, not getting so anxious, not getting so irritated when things don't go right, being a lot more able to empathize with other people, a lot more sympathetic, a lot more able to re-establish your concentration and your awareness when you lose it. The more that you can observe these kinds of benefits in your daily life, the more your commitment to practice of meditation will be. And also, another skillful means I'd like to share with you today is that the Buddha was once talking of puja, or so we don't really have, I'm not sure the best word for this, let's say worship, that has certain connotations with it. The Buddha says that there are two kinds of worship. There is the material kind of worship in which Buddhists would light candles, offer incense and flowers and so on. That's the material kind of worship of the Buddha, and out of reverence for his teaching. And there is the puja, the worship, the offering of practice. And it's the offering of practice that the Buddha appreciates the most. Now, if you see a good cause, say offering money to a charity of some kind, helping people in distress, what do? You see, well, what resources do I have? How much can I afford? And you give as much as you can afford, and then you feel happy and proud that you've contributed that much. You've given as much as you could, and you feel happy with that. And I feel you can apply that same principle to meditation. You have a sense of offering, and it can be an offering to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha, the Triple Gem. You can offer 20 minutes of your time, 30 minutes of your time to enhance the amount of mindfulness in the world, the amount of peace and calm in the world. And you're going to make that an offering to the Buddha. You dedicate it to your teachers, you dedicate it to or you may choose to reflect on the Buddha's words that of all the meritorious activities that can be performed by a human being, the practice of the development of peace and understanding is the most profound. And the Buddha said, if you were to offer a meal, if you had the great good fortune to offer a meal to the Lord Buddha and 500 enlightened disciples, you would still get less merit than if your mind became totally calm for one finger snap. So it's an incredibly meritorious activity, even if you don't feel you're particularly calm. And if you have a loved one, someone that you care about, someone who's suffering, then you can say, I'm going to offer this 20 minutes, this 30 minutes, this hour, I'm going to offer the merit that arises to my father, to my mother, to my spouse, to my children. And so the whole mindset changes, doesn't it? It's not what can I get out of it, I hope I get peaceful today, and it's always me and my practice, and it's not going as well as I'd like it to. So it's like, what have I got to give? It's a wonderful cause, something that's really, I really want to support. I've got this much, I'll give this much. You say, well, I'd like to offer merit and dedicate merit to my teachers, offer merit to loved ones and people I care about. I don't know how much I'll have, how much peace, how much merit, but however much I have, I'm going to give. And that's a very skillful way to approach meditation. If you are very sort of me and my practice, and it's going well, and it's not going well, or if you're feeling very lazy, you're saying, well, if I sit, it's quite late, I'll probably get a bit sleepy, and I'll just go and have a rest, just go and sleep, so I hardly do any different, If you're doing it for yourself, you think, well, I'm reasonably peaceful anyway, I'm not really, or else, I'm so confused, even if I was to sit, it'd be a waste of time, so or it's too early, it's too late, it's too hot, it's too cold, I'm too hungry, I've just eaten my meal, and all these kind of, so you say, well, however it is, it's time to offer something, offer some merit, dedicate some merit through this sitting practice or this walking practice. But this is a skillful means, and encourage you all to see the way your mind works and find skillful means of dealing with the particular obstacles and obstructions that you're experiencing. Within the basic parameters that the Buddha laid down, there is a real opportunity to innovate and to find something that works for you. So what is practice? It's all your life. It's what you're doing every moment of the day. And how can you most clearly and most sincerely express the Buddha's wisdom and compassion in your daily life? So these are the few words that I'd like to share with you this afternoon, and I'd like to bring the talk to an end at this point, and in the remaining time offer your opportunity to ask me to clarify anything that I may not have explained clearly, or to argue with me, tear my talk to pieces, or ask about anything at all. Please feel free.